Today what I want to do is talk a little bit about estimating corn yields and what kind of predictive value they have. As you know, there's a lot of yield predictions that are made by the USDA, and these are done for a lot of different reasons. One, it helps individual farmers market their crop and also plan for their crop in terms of the number of acres and crops they'll grow every year. It's also, these estimates are also used for industry for forecasting transportation and storage needs. They're also used by insurance or agencies for insurance and disaster aid, and they're also used by grower associations to help set policy decisions through Congress and various legislatures. So, and finally, one of the more important things, and we oftentimes see a market surge or market increase in price or decrease, they're oftentimes used to and influence markets. And whether that's right or wrong, a lot of people get upset by that, but it's still a part of this whole yield estimation process that goes on. If you look at how the U.S. does, or the USDA does these market forecasts, it's pretty amazing, really. It's a very comprehensive, complete data set that's done not only for corn, but for soybeans, wheat, barley, cotton, a lot of different crops, and they do this as a routine practice as the season goes on. Before we can really talk about some of this forecasting, though, we need to know how a corn kernel develops in the field. Usually at pollination time, around July, the corn goes through a pollination process. If an ovule is fertilized, that kernel begins to grow, and it grows in kind of an S shape in terms of weight accumulation. There's an initial lag phase where all that is occurring is cell division. There's a linear phase where the kernels are putting on, when you look at an area basis, they're putting on anywhere between 4 to 6 or 7 bushels per acre per day. This is one of those nice 6 to 7 bushel days, I think. And then at the end you have kind of a plateauing effect that goes on. When that plateauing effect occurs, there's usually 15 to 20% of our yield left to determine. Now, we're oftentimes making these yield estimates right during that linear phase of growth, and actually the first estimate is made in the lag phase, very early in this whole process of accumulating yield. The USDA does this by basically by going out into the field and measuring yield. For example, in Wisconsin, they have about 100 sample sites that they go to, and each time they visit that field, they're going back to the same spot in the field. Every acre in the state has an equal chance of being selected. These reports come out, usually the data is collected at the end of the month. The first one's the end of July, the deadline's August 1st, and the first report will come out usually 10 to 12 days later. They do this at the end of July, at the end of August, end of September, and the end of October, and then the final numbers are released in January. Basically, the measurements that are taken are the ears per area, the ear volume, which is length times diameter, and then grain yield is actually measured, and then in some of the later dates they actually go back and measure the amount left on the ground, or the gleanings that were left on the ground after the combine passed. So there's a lot of measurements that are taken each time that a sample is made. The early one that comes out in July is really a plant population one. And this year in 2011, the initial number that came in was 159 bushels per acre, which ties the previous record last year, and last year was a record year. So we have a very good crop going this year in terms of the stand. Now, it still remains to be seen what happens as we go through this kernel development, these kernel development stages, as to what kind of yields we'll end up with in the future. In general, as these estimates come out, August 1, September 1, October 1, so on, the estimates and the numbers that are given are better and better as time goes on. We'll see quite a bit of variability with the August and September projections, but then as we get to October and November, it's relatively close to the final number given by USDA at the end of the season. So again, that's a little bit of background. Now, if you were going to try to do this on your farm, do some of these yield estimates, I'd like to just describe a couple of them that are relatively quick to use. One is called the yield component method that was developed by the University of Illinois. This is where you take the number of ears in a 1,000th of a row, multiply that by the number of rows around the ear and the number of kernels along a row, and then multiply it by a fudge factor, or divide it actually by a fudge factor. And this fudge factor is basically the number of kernels that are in a bushel, which ranges from 80,000 to 90,000 kernels per bushel. The number that the University of Illinois uses is 89.605. The fudge factor is determined by the length or depth of the kernel. Here we've got two ears that both have about 16 rows around the ear. And if it came from a field that had the same number of plants or ears per area and the same number of kernels per area, which one do you think is going to yield more? It's going to be the one on the left that has a little bit longer kernel, a little deeper kernel, and basically the size of that kernel is just so much bigger than the one on my right. So that's the fudge factor that we have to use. In general, the bigger the kernel, the lower that number would be, closer to 80, and the smaller the kernel, the closer to 90 that number would be. Okay, so that's one quick way. Another quick way is to just walk through your field, count the number of ears in 30 feet of row, and then go to a chart and and go over to your row spacing, and you can get the number of bushels in that field. So for example, if we have 33 ears and 30 feet of row, that particular field at 30-inch row spacing would yield 136 bushels to the acre. So, but this number then needs to also be adjusted by a fudge factor. Okay, and that fudge factor is the length of the ear. Generally, a half a pound of grain on an ear, the ear will be about 7.5 inches long. If those ears are longer than 7.5 inches, then you would increase that yield by a factor, and usually it's around 1.4. If it's smaller than 7.5 inches, then you would decrease the yield from this table, and it can be down to as low at 5-inch ear length, it could be as low as 0.4 as a factor. So those are just some real quick, easy ways to get a handle on estimating yield within your field. And remember, I think the important point here, though, is what the USDA National Ag Statistics Service does in terms of being able to go out into a large area across the whole Corn Belt and come back with estimates of yield. And that to me is a very amazing process, and a lot of people I don't think appreciate all the effort and work that goes into getting at some of these numbers.